Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric, and our continuing series where I review every Capcom CP, CP System Dash, CPS II, and CPS III game ever made. Today we're taking a look at the King of Dragons, released in 1991. And rule of thumb is, if there's a dwarf and you can select him, that is definitely what you should do. It's an indisputable gaming fact that the dwarf is always the best. Before we get to very involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down there as well. What can I say about the King of Dragons that I already haven't said about all the other Capcom beat-em-ups we've featured on this series so far? And honestly, it's as good as all the rest. This is an excellent beat-em-up, but for me it has a lot of things that I'm really looking for, and that's that kind of fantasy setting. I've mentioned it in previous videos, but I kind of love the Conan the Barbarian sort of, warrior saga storylines. I love Rostin Saga and Warrior Blade, and the King of Dragons fits perfectly into that genre as something that I'm really going to enjoy playing. Now, if you're not that into the fantasy setting, maybe something like Final Fight would be better for you. But if you enjoy beat-em-ups and you've never played the King of Dragons before, 100% after you're done with this video, you should check it out. But I really like this game just from a mechanical standpoint, because one of my biggest complaints about some beat-em-ups is that it's very sensitive of whether or not your strike is actually going to hit your opponent. If you're slightly too far up or down on the playfield, you're just going to whiff your attacks. And you can see here, the King of Dragons is quite forgiving with that, because when you feel like you're supposed to be making contact with an enemy and you're just not, it's a bummer. The great thing about this game, though, is it has the light RPG elements you'll see there at the end of that stage, where you're able to upgrade our axe, and this feels very much like the Dungeons & Dragons games for the CPS II, Shadow over Mystara, and Tower of Doom. And I feel like this is, in a way, a precursor to those games, because you don't have as much choice on what direction you want to go compared to the D&D games, but you do get power-ups, you are able to level up and improve your character, and that's always a really fun thing to be able to do. Visually, though, I absolutely love this game, especially for 1991, all the different colors, how big the sprites are, that cloud in the background going from purple to blue. It really does look like an actual sunset, or as close as you could get to 16-bit graphics in 1991. But this game just looks great, it sounds great, it plays great, it's got that fantasy vibe setting, and even in your boss encounters here, there's multi-tiered stages. We just fell through the floor, and we're now into this inner core of the castle with that winding staircase in the background. The art directors and the designers at Capcom did everything they could to make this a really unique and feature-filled and detailed game, and I do really appreciate that. The other thing I like about it a lot is that you'll see here, we're only 3 minutes into the video, but we've already gone through 2 different stages, and moving on, we're outdoors going up a mountain. This game is constantly changing the scenery for you, and that's another one of my big complaints with arcade games. If they start feeling too samey, where you think you've been going through the same areas over and over again, the King of Dragons is going to give you a lot of diversity in the visuals, so that as soon as you're starting to feel like you've been in one area a little bit too long, it's going to change everything up and give you something fresh to look at, which I think is a really nice design choice that I wish some more arcade games did, because I always feel like sometimes the stages are just a little bit too long, or the next stage feels too similar to the one you just came from and you feel like you're just kind of retreading the same territory. But the boss battles in this game are awesome. We're fighting this giant dragon now, and they are quite hard. But the game never feels unfair. It gives you all the resources and all the skills you need to be able to hold your own. And of course it is an arcade game, so it does want to take your credits, but it's not that unfair. And I feel like all of Capcom's beat-em-ups are relatively fair. They're not out to take too many of your credits compared to some other games I played on the channel that seem like they're just trying to mug you in a dark alley. But to see again, like I mentioned, we move on to the next one, the Cave of Hydra, and everything changes. But what I really love is that you get the chance to change your fighter while you're playing the game, because they are leveling up alongside you even though you're not using them. So maybe there is a different character that would be better for a different stage, and you actually have the option to go ahead and change mid-playthrough. You don't have to die to change. You can do it between certain stages, and I really like that as a sort of gameplay mechanic. But the music in this grade is also amazing, so go ahead and listen for about a minute. I'll come back and tell you more about why, if you never played the King of Dragons, you're missing out. Be right back. I also love how big the bosses and the sprites in this game are. That boss, the Hydra, is just gigantic. And you'll see here that when we do beat certain stages, you're going to get a little bit of story. This game has as much story as any arcade game is ever going to give you, but it actually has quite a good story, and it does help to kind of propel you forward momentum-wise and want to see the end of the game. But now we get the option to change our player again, so let's just try somebody new, because people have asked me to change up characters on these playthroughs. I definitely try to listen to you guys, so you've asked me to do that, so we're going to take a look at the cleric. And like I mentioned earlier, everything has changed. Now we're on this giant galleon, we're going by these shipwrecks, skeletons are being flown in by birds. It feels like not a completely different game, but a completely different area in the game. You get new enemies, they're not recycling too much, you get different power-ups, and everything goes from being, really dark and kind of, dank because we're in a cave, to being out in the sunlight, and we're getting fish monsters. And that's what I really love about this game, and I think Capcom in general did a really good job when they were making games of really trying to give you something to do in each stage going into the other one. You'll see there I hit that too early, but you do get these orbs that fly around, and if you strike them it gives you a magical attack on screen at the same time. So you definitely want to manage how you're attacking your opponents, because if you hit them too early, it's completely useless. So you really want to kind of fill the screen up with opponents and let that orb kind of drift towards you, so you're able to take advantage of that attack. It's kind of hard sometimes. I feel like the game maybe sometimes put those orbs out a little too early, but you can kind of, kite them along with you to be able to take out some of the higher level enemies. But here we're in a graveyard and we get totally different skeletons. There's so much diversity in the enemies in this game. There's so much diversity in the backgrounds, the different settings, the character types. This is a great game that if you want to play it with 2 players or more. If you have a friend, one of you can be the dwarf, because you have to choose the dwarf, and one of you can be a cleric, and you get different types of gameplay in this same game. Or if you want to do multiple playthroughs, one with each character, it's definitely something that you're going to enjoy a ton of. But moving on, we're going to see what I think is the precursor to the spiral staircase level in the D&D games on the CPS II. It seems like the designers at Capcom were working out how they were going to manage doing a fully revolving staircase in a castle. And of course the CPS II games that we're going to be seeing shortly had a lot more power than the Capcom play system, but this definitely feels like almost a beta for the Dungeons & Dragons game, not only in play type, not only in genre, but in some ways the level structure feels like the Capcom developers are kind of noodling around with what they could do with more increased hardware. And this is one of the later games on the Capcom play system as well. That's why it looks better than some of the other games that we have seen. I also like that we have that gnome character that comes out just like in Golden Axe. You keep hitting him and you're going to get more treasures popping out of them. But again, we have another boss, another great looking boss, and they all feel unique. They're not just different sprites that are going to attack you the same way. Each boss requires its own kind of strategy and mechanics, the way you play them. This is one of those games, the more you play it, the better you're going to get at it. And this is a beat 'em up that I actually do play pretty regularly when I feel like enjoying it. And it's one that you kind of really feel like there's something there to come back to, because some arcade games, you've beaten them once, you kind of feel like you've seen everything there is to see. Where with King of the Dragons, there's definitely some replayability in there. This game isn't going to get mentioned in the same breath as something like Final Fight for the Capcom play system, because while this is a really great game and I'm sure plenty of people know about it, it's not so publicly well known conscious-wise as something like Final Fight. That's a series and a game that is just beloved by basically anyone who likes beat-em-ups or arcade games. King of the Dragons is a little bit more of a deep cut. It's still well known, but maybe you haven't played it. But I want to hear. Tell me in the comments below. Have you played this game before? Have you heard of it? If you haven't, are you going to check it out afterwards? Because one of my favorite things is when people say, I didn't know this existed, and they go decide to play the game after I'm done with the video. And it's really easy to play the game if you want to. It's on the Super Nintendo. It's definitely graphically downgraded. The arcade version's the best to play, but it's available in multiple compilations. You can emulate it. I'm playing it on the MiSTer FPGA board right now. But short of that, that is King of Dragons. The only strike I can give against it is that I have to fight spiders, and I really, really hate them in real life, so I don't really like seeing them in my games. Short of that, we will be back next week with another video in our Capcom Play Series reviews, and we're going to be shortly moving on to the CP System Dash, the CPS II. But like I mentioned earlier, if you could do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell. It definitely helps me out. And if you feel so inclined, if you see some spiders, I wouldn't step on them, but get them out of your house because they're terrible and I hate them. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.